Consider this startling possibility. Could the relentless spiritual quest to annihilate the ego, a cornerstone of many modern paths, actually be hindering genuine growth? Surveys within mindfulness communities reveal surprisingly high rates of practitioners reporting increased anxiety or dissociation, phenomena sometimes linked to improper ego suppression techniques. This isn't merely about semantics, it's about questioning a fundamental premise that paints a natural psychological structure, the ego, as an inherent evil to be eradicated. We're told enlightenment requires its destruction. But what if this widely accepted truth is, in fact, spirituality's most pervasive and potentially damaging misunderstanding? This investigation dives deep into the complex nature of the ego across various wisdom traditions, contrasting popular spiritual narratives with psychological insights and historical contexts, to uncover whether the war on ego is a path to liberation or a detour into subtle self-deception. We will explore if the target of our spiritual efforts needs re-evaluation, moving beyond simple eradication towards a more nuanced integration. In countless workshops, bestsellers, and online forums, the message echoes. The ego is the ultimate adversary. It's presented as the source of suffering, the barrier to bliss, the selfish, fearful construct that keeps us chained to illusion. Popular spirituality often frames it as a distinct entity, a sort of inner demon whispering insecurities and desires, demanding constant vigilance and eventual destruction. The narrative is compellingly simple. Identify egoic thoughts, pride, judgment, attachment, and systematically dismantle them. Success is measured by the perceived diminishment of this inner voice, leading towards a state of supposed egolessness, equated with spiritual attainment. This framework offers a clear enemy and a straightforward, albeit challenging, path. Transcendence, we're told, lies on the other side of this internal battlefield. But this popular portrayal often lacks nuance, reducing a complex psychological function to a caricature villain. Does this simplistic view truly serve us, or does it set up an unwinnable, unnecessary war within ourselves? The promise is liberation, but the premise deserves scrutiny. Let's interrupt the spiritual narrative for a moment and consider the ego from a different lens: developmental psychology and neuroscience. Far from being an arbitrary construct or spiritual flaw, the ego, often termed the self or I in these fields, is understood as a crucial psychological structure. It begins developing in early childhood, around 18 months to 2 years, enabling us to differentiate ourselves from the external world. This differentiation is fundamental for navigating reality, forming relationships, and establishing a coherent sense of identity. The ego performs vital executive functions: decision-making, impulse control, reality testing, and organizing our thoughts and experiences into a cohesive narrative. It allows us to set goals, make plans, and maintain a sense of continuity through time. Without this organizing principle, our subjective experience could devolve into chaos. Therefore, viewing the ego solely as negative overlooks its indispensable role in basic psychological functioning and survival. The capacity for self-reflection, a key element in spiritual growth, is itself mediated by ego functions. To speak of completely eliminating the ego is, from this perspective, akin to trying to eliminate the brain's operating system. Perhaps the issue isn't the ego itself, but its potential for unhealthy fixation or maladaptive patterns. The Buddhist concept of Anatta, often translated as no self or non-self, is frequently misinterpreted in the West as a call for ego death. However, this translation misses crucial subtlety. Anatta doesn't assert that the conventional self, the I that experiences the world, doesn't exist on a functional level. Instead, it points to the impermanence and interdependence of all phenomena, including the components we typically label as self: our thoughts, feelings, body, and perceptions. The Buddha taught diligent observation, vipassana, or insight meditation, not as a method to destroy the ego, but to understand its constructed and transient nature. By observing the arising and passing of thoughts and sensations without identification, practitioners can realize that there is no fixed, independent, permanent self-entity residing within. It's not about killing an inner enemy, but about seeing through the illusion of a solid, enduring ego. The suffering arises not from the ego's existence, but from our attachment to this illusory sense of a permanent self. Therefore, the goal isn't ego annihilation, but rather a profound shift in perspective, recognizing the constructed self for what it is, thereby loosening its grip and reducing the suffering caused by clinging to it. Contrast the confrontational approach with the wisdom of Taoism. Here, the ego isn't positioned as an antagonist to be conquered, but as a natural part of the universal flow. The Taoist philosophy emphasizes harmony and balance, viewing all aspects of existence, including the human psyche, as interconnected parts of a greater whole. The key principle of Wu Wei, often translated as effortless action or non-doing, offers a radically different perspective on navigating the self. Wu Wei doesn't mean passivity. It means acting in alignment with the natural course of things, without forcing or struggling against the current. Applied to the ego, this suggests working with its tendencies and energies rather than declaring war upon them. Instead of suppression, Taoism might guide one to observe the ego's movements, understand its motivations, often rooted in natural desires for safety or connections, and gently guide its expression towards balance and harmony with the broader flow of light. The idea isn't to eliminate the boat, but to learn how to steer it skillfully along the river Hale, using the currents rather than fighting them. The lie of necessary ego destruction dissolves in this view, replaced by the art of skillful alignment. Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung offered a profound Western psychological framework that challenges the spiritual notion of ego transcendence through destruction. Jung saw the ego as the center of consciousness, essential for functioning, but not the entirety of the psyche. His concept of individuation is a lifelong process of psychological development aimed at achieving wholeness, which crucially involves integrating the conscious ego with the unconscious elements, particularly the shadow. The shadow contains the repressed, denied aspects of ourselves, desires, traits, and potentials we deem unacceptable. Jung argued that suppressing or trying to annihilate the ego or denying the shadow is not only futile, but psychologically damaging. It leads to fragmentation, projection, seeing our denied traits in others, and hinders true self-understanding. Instead, individuation requires acknowledging, confronting, and integrating these darker aspects, guided by the ego. This integration doesn't destroy the ego, it expands consciousness and evolves the ego into a more flexible, mature, and resilient structure, capable of mediating between the inner and outer worlds more effectively. Jung critiqued what would later be called spiritual bypassing, using spiritual ideas to avoid necessary psychological work. From a Jungian perspective, the lie isn't just that the ego must be destroyed, but that spirituality can replace the difficult work of integrating our whole selves, shadow included. Beyond Buddhism, Taoism, and Jung, other less mainstream spiritual and psychological systems offer further nuanced views challenging the ego as enemy narrative. George Gurdjieff, a mystic philosopher, described the typical human state as waking sleep, run by mechanical habits and identifications, which he collectively associated with personality or false ego. His fourth way system wasn't about destroying the structure, but about awakening from its automatic control through self-observation and conscious effort. The goal was to develop real I, or consciousness, which could then utilize the personality functions without being enslaved by them. It's a process of de-automatization, not annihilation. Similarly, Almaas, founder of the Diamond Approach, presents a sophisticated psycho-spiritual path viewing ego structures not as inherently bad, but as initial, limited organizations of consciousness that obscure deeper essence or true nature. However, the ego structure itself, developed through childhood, is also seen as a necessary container and potential vehicle for realizing and expressing this essence. Spiritual work involves understanding the ego's limitations and defenses, allowing essence to emerge, and eventually integrate with a transformed, more transparent ego structure. In this view, the ego isn't discarded but refined and utilized in service of deeper realization. Furthermore, many indigenous worldviews offer perspectives vastly different from the individualistic focus, often found in westernized spirituality and psychology. While the term ego might not translate directly, the concept of self is often deeply embedded within the context of community, ancestry, and relationship to the land. The self isn't an isolated unit battling internal demons, but rather a node within a web of reciprocal relationships. Identity and purpose are derived from one's role and responsibilities within the tribe, the ecosystem, and the cosmos. From such perspectives, an overly inflated or detached sense of individual self might be seen as problematic, not because the self is inherently bad, but because it disrupts the harmony and balance of the collective. The emphasis is often on contributing to the well-being of the community and honoring interconnectedness, rather than on an individualistic quest for personal egolessness. The ego, or sense of self, functions as a tool for fulfilling one's unique role within the larger whole. This contrasts sharply with the narrative of solitary transcendence, suggesting that a healthy sense of self is one that is relational, responsible, and oriented towards the collective good, rather than something to be eradicated in isolation. The relentless campaign against the ego, especially when misunderstood or applied rigidly, carries significant psychological risk. One major danger is spiritual bypassing, using spiritual beliefs and practices to avoid dealing with unresolved emotional wounds, psychological needs, and developmental tasks. Someone might claim it's just my ego to dismiss valid anger, grief, or boundary-setting needs, hindering genuine emotional processing and integration. Paradoxically, the aggressive attempt to suppress the ego can sometimes fuel a spiritual ego, a subtle form of narcissism where one feels superior due to their perceived egolessness or spiritual attainment. History is replete with examples of spiritual teachers preaching ego dissolution while exhibiting grandiose behavior, manipulation, and ethical failures, demonstrating that denied ego aspects often resurface in distorted, harmful ways. Furthermore, extreme attempts at ego suppression, particularly without proper guidance or psychological grounding, can potentially lead to dissociation, depersonalization, or even psychotic breaks in vulnerable individuals. When the structure that helps us navigate reality is actively undermined without careful integration work, the results can be destabilizing and psychologically damaging. The very effort to kill the ego proves its resilience. It often just morphs into a more insidious, spiritualized form. So, if outright war on the ego is misguided and potentially harmful, what is the alternative? The synthesis emerging from diverse wisdom traditions in psychology points towards integration and balance, not annihilation. This involves acknowledging the ego's necessary functions while cultivating awareness of its patterns, limitations, and conditioning. It's about developing a relationship with the ego rather than treating it as an enemy combatant. Practices like Buddhist mindfulness help us observe egoic thoughts and feelings without automatically identifying with them, loosening their grip. Jungian shadow work encourages us to compassionately reclaim denied parts of ourselves, making the ego more whole and less reactive. Taoist principles guide us to align with natural energies, using the ego's drive more skillfully. Practically, this means cultivating self-awareness, noticing when ego defenses like pride, fear, or judgment arise. It involves questioning our attachments without self-flagellation. It requires honoring the ego's role in setting boundaries and navigating the world, while simultaneously connecting with deeper aspects of being, call it presence, essence, or true nature. The goal shifts from destroying the navigator to training it, from silencing the instrument to learning how to play it harmoniously as part of the larger orchestra of the psyche. Ultimately, the biggest lie propagated by some streams of spirituality isn't that the ego can cause suffering. It clearly can through attachment, aversion, and delusion. The lie is the insistence that the ego itself is the fundamental problem and that its eradication is the necessary solution for spiritual liberation. This framing creates an internal war, misunderstands crucial psychological functions, ignores the wisdom of balanced integration found in many traditions, and can lead to harmful suppression and bypassing. The evidence from psychology, along with nuanced interpretations of Buddhist, Taoist, Jungian, and other perspectives, suggests a more mature and constructive path. The ego isn't an enemy to be slain, but a tool to be understood, a lens to be polished. It's the interface through which we experience individuality, make choices, and engage with the world. When distorted by conditioning, fear, and attachment, the view through the lens is obscured. But the solution isn't to break the lens, it's to patiently, diligently clean it through self-awareness, compassion, and integration. True spiritual growth may lie not in becoming egoless, but in developing a healthy, flexible, transparent ego that serves rather than dominates our journey towards wholeness and connection. What specific ego pattern have you mistaken for an enemy? Reflecting on this could be the first step towards cleaning your own lens.